public school system, utter failure. They're going to take 8 or 9 hours a day to try to teach your kids what you could probably teach them in an hour and a half a day. You will learn to beg permission from a stranger to be allowed to go to the bathroom in the next hour if they choose to allow you. And if they're having a bad day, no, you don't get to.
Part of a system that children are ingrained from the beginning, don't ask to go to the bathroom, don't ask why. The biggest, most important question we have in the world is why.
It also says, sit silently at your desk for 8 hours. Nobody has time to listen to you. No one wants to hear from you. Be totally and utterly silent, or you will be punished and medicated like these other kids around you.
When you look at test scores of homeschooling students, they often score far above the regular SAT scores of public school students.
I would love to hear from you. What do you have to say immediately to people say homeschooling people are weird? Claire, you are what I would consider one of the few real homeschooling experts in the United States. Most people, when they start thinking about homeschooling, they say, who the heck am I supposed to learn from? Who can I ask? What can I do? Where do I learn how to homeschool my kids because I'm not putting them in public school? And most people don't have anybody to talk to, so they have to fumble through it. It's tough. Thank you, number one, for having a lot of resources out there right there. What is it that got you so into the topic of homeschooling and teaching about homeschooling?
Well, I was homeschooled, and thank you for bringing up homeschooling resource and saying such wonderful things about me. But I don't always feel like that because I personally was homeschooled my whole life alongside my brother and my sister. So to me, being passionate about homeschooling is just like living. And this is how I grew up. I love my lifestyle. I love how my parents raised me. So for me to just jump into it came naturally. Now, that's not to say there wasn't some pushes along that way that made me be more outspoken about it. But the lifestyle itself has just been part of my life. So it's easy to talk about.
I love that. So I grew up in the California public school system myself. Yes. My wife, however, was homeschooled, and now we have 5 children, and she's homeschooling all 5 of them. And I work so that she can do that. My role is to provide so that she can do that for our kids and give them such a foundational start. So you don't have to convince me of the benefits of homeschooling. What I would really like is to reach those people out there who are listening in the audience right now who maybe are skeptical about homeschooling, right? A lot of what I hear is you're going to be weird. You're not going to be acclimated to society. You're not socialized to the rest of society. And the people that say that usually are some of the most miserable human beings on earth, and they've been properly socialized into American culture, which is part of the problem. I would love to hear from you. What do you have to say immediately to people say homeschooling people are weird?
That to me is the biggest misconception. Have you looked at the regular public school systems? Have you heard? I literally got a message from somebody telling me that there are kids in their school identifying as certain things that now use the sinks. Okay, so maybe I'm weird because I'm quirky, but I don't find myself any weirder than anybody else out there. So huge misconception. But I'll tell you a funny story about that. So little known fact about me, I was a huge sales rep for a medical device company. All weirdness, homeschooling me, managed to somehow have a career in sales, being very public facing for a large medical device company. Anyway, that being said, I was at my child's play space 2 weeks ago, maybe, and it was only me and another, a grandfather of some children there. And we're there for 2 hours, like you do. You sit at a child's play space and do nothing. And I walked over and sat next to him and just started chatting. Turns out he used to be a professor at NC State in history. And he says, but I don't do that anymore, he tells me. And I said, oh, why is that? He said, the children have absolutely no interest in the topic of history. It's horrible. These kids couldn't care less to learn. They just want to take a test, get a grade, and leave. I said, oh, wow. We started chatting about that. I was like, yeah, I think it is really tough to see that in children. That's why I homeschool my kid. He immediately responds to me and says, I could never get behind homeschooling. I said, oh, after you've already told me all this. I said, why is that? And he said, because those kids are weird. They're not very social. So then me, of course, sitting there chatting with the only other person in there, I looked at him and I said, really? What would you say if I told you I was homeschooled my whole life? He says, I wouldn't believe you. I was, and I think I did all right. I came over here, met you, I know your name, know where you're from, know your background in about 5 minutes. So for me, that is one of the biggest misconceptions I've heard. And I honestly think it's something that public schools sort of continually talk about so that they discourage people from homeschooling so they can think it really is this weird group of people, but it's not.
You know, it is. It is. People don't realize how much the public school system is a tax farm and a money funnel. And it is designed to pull your kids in, turn them into a commodity, barely educate them for something that might have been useful 30, 40 years ago, and things that they're going to take 8 or 9 hours a day to try to teach your kids what you could probably teach them in an hour and a half a day. So who knows what they're spending the other 9 hours. You're not even allowed to intrude in the classroom anymore and learn what your kids are supposed to be studying. In fact, parents who are engaged, the FBI is now being weaponized against parents who want to learn what their children are learning. And you're labeled an extremist now if you want to take care of your children and control some of their education and maybe even just, pay attention to your kids a little bit more. Make sure that they're getting the information. That's one thing that they don't want to talk about in the public school system. The other thing they don't want to talk about in the public school system, and I have to be careful about my wording here because YouTube doesn't like certain words. So everyone out there, you're going to have to imagine what I'm saying. The rate of inappropriate contact between paid administrative and school staff and children. So I had to check these stats. The stats were so shocking when I came across this stat that I had to check it with my producer, and we had to check it with some of our legal team first before I could even say this online because it's so shocking. But the U.S. government admits that up to 10% of U.S. school children in the public school system will have inappropriate contact visited upon them by a paid adult staff member from the public school system. Now, that's 10%. So anyone who's sitting there saying, my kids will be weird if I homeschool them, how would you like a 10% opportunity for your kids to have inappropriate contact with someone who's supposed to be socializing them properly? What do you think about this, Claire? I'd love to hear your take on this.
One, I am never gambling any odds like that with my child's upbringing. There is no way. Doesn't matter what it is, whether it be their safety in the area you're bringing up or their safety as it relates to certain other incidences that are in the news with, gun safety, etc. I am not gambling. If there's a 1% chance, a 10% chance, it's not happening. I know who's involved in my child's life. I am there every single day. And the stat you bring up, I'm not shocked because I personally know several people, children, who have gone through the system and had exactly that happen. Exactly. And not only did that happen to them, nothing was done to that teacher or coach. Nothing. And nothing could be done. And those children went through horrific times because of it. Really, really damaging their confidence to the point where I don't think they realize how much they've been damaged. Because also, on another topic, there's a whole hypersexualization in the school system that I think has gone so past inappropriate that they don't know what's right and wrong, what a good relationship is, what a bad relationship is. I think that aspect of education is severely damaging to children, and we don't realize how prevalent it is because you'll never hear that stat on the news. You won't hear it publicized everywhere because that's not something they want you to see. They want you to think that your children are taken care of, you stay out of it, we'll take care of the kids.
That is a painful, agonizing truth. And it's not only the adults there that you have to be worried about, right? You're going to take your kids. The purpose of sending them to public school is to socialize them. Let's talk about some of the stats about inappropriate contact among peers. I used to work with a lot of at-risk families in a low-income clinic. I was paid about half the usual therapist rate to take care of these people. And I loved it. It was some of the most rewarding work I ever did. It was wonderful helping families pick back up after severe traumas. And unfortunately, quite a few of them had inappropriate contact from peers at school. Even girls having inappropriate contact from other girls in the bathrooms at public school. And we're talking 12 years old. Wildly inappropriate stuff. Now imagine you send your 12-year-old daughter to public school and she manages to avoid that 1 in 10 stat. with an adult staff member at the school. Now you have to be concerned about her socializing with the other people in the school that she is not wanting to connect with. That's even just assuming that it's same-sex bathrooms, for example, with all the differences happening with bathroom argumentation and things like that going on, not to pick a political side, but to be concerned about your daughter's rate of getting through school. It's no wonder that we now also say that by the time a woman is 18, she has a 1 in 4 chance of having inappropriate contact from somebody against her will, right? A lot of that seems to be coming from the school system itself, right? So homeschooling, talk to me about some of the good stats with homeschooling. I would love to hear any of those stats that you have, because the audience here, they love numbers. They love facts. They love, for example, hearing maybe how many average grades ahead most homeschoolers are versus the public school system. Share with us, Claire, some of those good stats that we would like to hear.
Okay, well, one of the things that I hear, which I think is very odd, people tell me that they think homeschooling is for the wealthy. Which, if you homeschool, have you heard this? They're like, oh, well, it's usually if you have enough money, you can homeschool. And to me, it's a really funny statistic. Or a lot of times it's a certain demographic who homeschools. But recently stats came out that actually said it's more diversified than you would ever believe. And different demographics, ones that you wouldn't necessarily automatically assume, are some of the biggest implementers of homeschooling. And I believe, and I'd have to double check the quote, but I think the average income of a family who's homeschooling is around $50,000 a year or less.
Wow.
And that was a really recent stat. I think it was 2023. And people are shocked when I tell them that, because it's something they don't expect. I hear so frequently, well, you have to have money to do that. And when you look at the homeschooling families, yes, there are the Elon Musks of the world who homeschool. And, obviously that's what their choice is. They want to make sure their kids are protected. They're choosing it.
I was just going to say, the wealthiest, most elite people are choosing homeschooling. So that should tell you something.
Right. Not private schooling. Some of them do private, but particularly homeschooling. And I mean, there are so many people who've gone through homeschooling that I could even mention who've become, who was it? Kentucky Fried Chicken. I think he was homeschooled. I also think there's a correlation between homeschoolers maybe being crunchy and then developing fast food, because I think like McDonald's was homeschooled. So that was a theory I have, but side note on that one. But yeah, I think that's one of the statistics that was recent that I thought was really shocking. Another stat that I heard was that people are always pushing their kids to start sooner, start kindergarten earlier, and, get into pre-K and pre-K. I don't know. I didn't go to any of those. But they found also recently that the harder you push kids to start learning earlier, the more likely, although their test readiness scores were pretty high, the more likely they were to fall behind in 3rd grade and then need remedial education later on. So it's kind of a funny thing to see people pushing for a certain behavior that homeschooling is the exact opposite of. We don't push for our children to learn earlier, faster, sooner. Typically, it's a little bit of a slower, more natural process. So, and then when you look at test scores of homeschooling students, they often score far above the regular SAT scores of public school students. So, I mean, those are some of the stats that we've heard. If you've got any others off the top of your head, I can tell you some of those.
Oh man,
there's so many.
There's such a wealth of information out there for anybody who's willing to learn about homeschooling and not just go the standard cookie cutter route of, well, you're going to be weird, right? If you just dig at all, you very quickly find that your kids are probably going to be several grades ahead. They're going to save about half of their hours in the day to be able to do other things or learn more, which is why they get so far ahead. All of my kids are homeschooled, and yeah, we hold them till about 5 or 6. We don't let them start too early, but you know what? They're watching their brothers and sisters have so much fun doing it that they love to roll in. They beg us to roll in, so they want to learn together. I have in my home, we've converted one corner of our living room into a school setting so that they can sit around this table, have their cushions, and it's their school room, and they love it. They get to decorate it, they play, and then they get up and they get to go learn practical skills. A lot of people, they whine and complain on the internet so much about, well, this was important. They didn't teach me how to balance my checkbook in school, but they taught me about, and some stupid thing they teach you in school. And I say, well, why didn't you learn that at home? Why didn't you learn those practical skills at home? My kids are learning those practical skills and getting credits for them. And the history component, I'd love to hear from you about how your kids feel about history, because my son, he's 8 years old. He can't get enough of history right now.
That's amazing. Well, so one of the things I like to champion about homeschooling as the parent who's implementing it a lot, I am a big advocate of take it on the road, learn it in real life, mainly because that's my personality. Like, I can't sit still. This is hard for me right here, right now. But I want to be out there learning. And I am almost as passionate about whatever we're learning as my son is. So you'd say history. Well, I was thinking about history and my thought was, how am I going to get a hyperactive 7-year-old into history, or 6-year-old when we started? Well, I started visiting living reenactment sites. I went to every, turn of the century home I could find. So we decided we were going to look at early settlement history of the US. And we started visiting these places and living in a Conestoga wagon, staying overnight in it, cooking outside in a fire pit. I didn't grow up doing any of that stuff, but I thought, wow, how cool for this kid. And does he now know about how we traveled across? I mean, the things this kid knows, he's telling me where Conestogans or wagons are built, how they were used, what a chuck wagon is. The other day we drove 3 hours south of here to Camden, South Carolina, to go look at a living reenactment Revolutionary War site.
That's awesome.
Now, I just watched The Patriot the other night, and I'm like, oh my God, I understand more history now than I ever did.
That's right.
I mean, I think when you get to learn on different levels for different people, but when you find an interest and you can exploit it on a level that really speaks to a kid, I mean, they love it. I mean, I was talking to someone earlier today about my son is into reptiles. So I've also tailored his education with like Bear Grylls. You remember Bear Grylls? Or like Bear Grylls. I've got activity books. I've got reading books. I've got Bear Grylls math. I mean, my son is going through Bear Grylls books like we sponsor the guy at this rate. We don't, but I mean, when it comes to certain topics that kids love, if there's something they're really grabbing onto, you could probably teach history through Bear Grylls, like you can teach it through the eyes of what a kid's interested in. So I was into horses as a kid. My parents taught me math. They taught me how to balance checkbooks for buying a horse that I never got. I learned how much to calculate for feed, the monthly rate. I mean, you weren't going to get me to do that any other way, but I was planning for the horse that I never received. So, I mean, I think when it comes to homeschooling, you got to really think a little bit outside the standard normalized box of what most people are used to in the education system. So sometimes I see people trying to implement school at home, which to me is foreign because I don't even know what school looks like. But I think a lot of times it's that freedom of, what are you passionate about? What do you want to learn? And how deep can we go on a topic? That's what I truly love about it.
There's two things. There's two things in my brain competing right now that I want to jump in and talk about. One is, yes, absolutely, that element of making that learning so much fun, because you have a great piece of content on that. I was absorbing your Instagram channel not that long ago, and you have a fantastic piece of content on there. And I want to come back to that, and I don't want the audience to forget that, because your Instagram is a huge resource for this. But number two, the other component, you said something at the beginning of like, man, sitting still is hard. I want to go learn. And that's the experience of so many young boys here today, as I want to go play, I want to go learn, I want to do, and then they get put in a classroom of 30 people, and the girls get rewarded for sitting silently and terrified in their seats. And the boys, what happens to the boys? Well, what's fascinating is that 1 in 7 American boys right now, here's the stat, 1 in 7 boys is being medicated for ADHD. 1 in 7. Now, does 1 in 7 boys have ADHD? Well, here's a curious fact. A lot of uncertified, right, not licensed therapists and not psychiatrists, teachers who are teachers, they're certified teachers, no healthcare conditions whatsoever, no healthcare certifications. They see boys who are acting up, and then they go and they tell the principal, this student is acting up and being disruptive in class. So the principal and the teacher call the parents in and say, your child is being disruptive. We require you to go to a psychologist or go to a doctor and get medication for ADHD, because we've seen this a ton of times. Your child will perform better with medication. If you are not willing to do this, we will expel your child. How do I know this is happening? How do I know this isn't just a conspiracy, Adam? How do I know that you're not just making this up? Well, You could look at the stats. You could look at the numbers online. You could look at the overwhelming volume of parents who are posting this exact story. But I can also tell you from my personal life that my son, he's 8 years old right now, 2 years ago, he was running and playing with one of his best friends from a church program. And they were 6 years old at the time. And his best friend went into first grade at a public school. And lo and behold, the teachers said, hey, this child's very disruptive. So they pulled the parents in and said, we are requiring you to put your child on ADHD medication or he will be expelled from the school. Now, both parents were working. They were unfortunately pretty heavily in debt. They had a big financial crash. She wasn't able to take time off. He wasn't able to take time off. So they were really struggling, not just with extravagances, but even just basic survival because of the debt system. And so they said, we have no choice. They felt they had no choice. They put their child on the medication and it turned him into a zombie. So now when my son wants to play with him, they can't run and play. They have to sit quietly. That kid, he does not run anywhere near as fast as he used to. His brain does not seem to be working as much. He has kind of a glazed expression. But you know what? He is an ideal little student in school. He gets B's, and not A's, but B's, and he's able to just kind of sit there quietly and drool out of both sides of his mouth evenly because it sits up straight, and he just stares like this at the board. And my son tries to engage him in the level of play that they used to do. Absolutely cannot do it. Meanwhile, my son, he's now in second grade. My son's learning fifth grade material, and his friend is now struggling in same grade material. He is struggling now in second grade material, where he was not struggling, interestingly, not struggling before. He was just a little bit more rambunctious. This is what we're doing to the American boys. Claire, talk to us a little bit about this. Is this something you're also seeing?
Oh, yeah, all the time. I mean, we have a personal experience, but I just want to bring up one thing. Someone commented to me a while ago on my Instagram, someone who had ADHD. She was in her 50s at the time, and she said, I believe what she said was, what we are doing to boys and children is a complete tragedy. See, she said that ADD, ADHD, these diagnoses are being labeled as a disorder when they should actually be a, oh my God, sorry, what's the word? Labeled as a disorder when they should actually be considered a amazing part of their personality. These children used to be, she said, the Pony Express riders. You know, these were the people who were the warriors, you know, they were the Spartans. They have an ability to focus for an insane amount of time. And maybe it's not on what you want, but the energy that they have when it's harnessed, when you harness that energy of a child who has such an abundance of it, they can go on forever. And what she said, and I literally saved this quote, and what she said was, when she learned, she was on the medication, when she came off of it and she learned how to regulate her body, she did artwork for when she was feeling out of sorts, but she learned how to regulate that crazy amount of energy and really drive it into something useful. She was unstoppable. And I truly believe that's the case. We are doing such a disservice to these children. I mean, for example, my brother was probably pretty classic ADD, ADHD, hyperactive, any disorder you can, antisocial. He went to a Waldorf school initially, okay? My mom, this is a while ago, 80s, my mom decided that she was not going to allow him to stay in the classroom because it was not serving him. He was anxious and stressed. And this was a Waldorf school, you know, it was still a school system where you'd be in the classroom. She told his teacher he was going to be pulled out at noon every single day. And she just told him point blank. This is before when people could have a little bit more say in what was going on.
You had parental rights, yeah.
Right. The school didn't like it. She did it for that year. The teacher came back and said, his first grade teacher came back and said, I wish more parents would have stood up for their kids' rights like you did, because it's exactly what he needed. That school system came back, pushed back on her to the point where she said, I'm homeschooling my kids. You don't know what's right for my kids. I know what's right for my kids. My brother today, not only was he drafted to the Mariners, one of the most popular kids I know, scouted by like Abercrombie to be a model, perfect pitch musician, can play guitar, saxophone, I mean, you name it, singer. He also is a lead VP salesperson for one of the leading companies here in mechanical equipment, etc. And he is so high functioning. Like when I tell you this kid, he is making dinner, making phone calls. He's got like 5 different sales teams running, and he's going for a run around the lake and teaching his kids. So maybe he had ADD, ADHD, maybe. Did it matter? No. Did he learn? He uses his guitar playing as a way to regulate himself. He'll be on a call, hang up his call, and what he does is jam out on the guitar. And that's what he does.
Now imagine if we had listened to the school teachers and just medicated him into zombiehood. That's what the school is doing to 1 in 7 boys right now. Is we're taking away VP of sales and medicating them into the ground for the first 10, 15 years of their life and ruining them. That's what homeschooling is meant to prevent.
And it's honestly, I truly believe a lot of the medical companies are behind so much of this. The minute they can push all this medicine, I mean, not only boys, but I'm sure you already know this and see this. Yes, boys are getting it, but girls are too. And not for ADD or ADHD. You know why, right? They're using it to get skinny. Because don't you know that you can medicate for that? And their parents push it because you don't want to be bullied. You don't want to be bullied in school. I don't want to be bullied. I've never been bullied. I don't know what that's like. So what are they doing? Oh, you have ADD. Let's get that diagnosis so you can make sure that you then can lose weight. And that's no joke. That's commonplace. Adults use it. I mean, I just find it fascinating that parents don't see how detrimental this is. It's kind of like a normalized lifestyle. Let's just say they have ADD. Everybody's got it. It's fine. But also, I think what people don't really stop to think about is what that does to the kid's psyche. I know we're normalizing it so everybody has it, but one of the things my mom was a huge champion about was not labeling a child, ever. She says they are all beautiful, they all have talents, and to go in there and a young child and tell them, you've got a disability, you don't learn quite the way everybody else does. Well, what are they going to do? Not learn the way everybody else does. Are they going to learn and rise through it? No, they've already been told you're not quite as good as everybody. It's not great. So, and it might sound harsh, and I'm really not trying to be. I just think it's such a disservice. So
It is. It is. We're shoving kids through a meat grinder, and we're hoping that a number of them will come out in the proper shape to go work in factories that no longer exist, for example, that we don't have. I saw one of your amazing pieces of content over on Instagram was the one that said, hey, have you noticed that the only 3 places that really are built the same is schools, public schools, and hospitals where you're going to be sick. And the third one is jails. Yes. I was struck when I went and worked in corrections. It was astounding. It was like, wow, it kind of reminded me of my public school system growing up in California. In fact, I remember we had bars with metal gates that they would pull across my public school to prevent people wandering on and violence and things like this. It was built like a prison, and then there was bells that worked just like factories and prisons, and they told you when you were allowed to go to the bathroom and when you weren't. I got 5 kids. Trying to regulate their bathroom breaks is tough. Like when you have to go, you have to go. No, you will learn to beg permission from a stranger to be allowed to go to the bathroom in the next hour if they choose to allow you. And if they're having a bad day, no, you don't get to, because they've just arbitrarily told you that you're not allowed to. But this will be a healthy system for functioning adults.
But my system, the way I was raised, is not healthy.
Right.
Where I could choose when to go to the bathroom. I could choose if I wanted to go run around the house a few times because I couldn't focus for 5 minutes. I regulated my own schoolwork growing up. Heck, I didn't read until I was 12. And that was shockingly okay. Not everybody can go through that situation and come out okay. My mom probably had 17 panic attacks. But could you imagine, like, what on earth would a parent think if they heard that their child wasn't reading? I would have been held back so many grades. I don't even know where I would have been by this point. But I read at 12, went to college, started college classes at 15. It was fine.
Now you run a social media brand with hundreds of thousands of followers, educating other people, helping families build better systems, taking care of kids, raising a better future generation. But yeah, you didn't learn to read at 12. So yeah, by the public school system, utter failure, utter and total failure.
Utter failure. But not only that, imagine what they would have told me. Because I always think about that. I think about that now. what if someone, so one of the things I think is different about me, because a lot of times people say, well, what's different being raised like you were? How do you feel different? One thing I always think is different is that I don't see any limitation. And I always like to joke and say, well, I'm not going to be a basketball player because I'm 5'2" on a good day. But if I need to learn how to do something, if I need to gain knowledge to do anything, I know how to go and find that information, research it, probably get a bit obsessive over learning it, and figure out what I need to know how to direct the best college coaches on basketball. I can learn the sport. I may not play it, but I feel like that's a huge difference in my mindset. And had I been told when I was a kid, you're not smart enough, I would have probably believed I wasn't. At an impressionable age, if you sit there and feed children information that says you're not good enough, not smart enough, not capable, they're going to believe that. And I'm not sitting here telling people to go and, say nonsense about children. I'm here to say, hey, if you work, if you try, if you want something, you can do it. I tell my son he loves to play tennis. I didn't come up with tennis. My neighbor across the street over there, he's a retired tennis coach. My son found out, knocked on his door and asked him to give him tennis lessons. I barely know how anybody scores with
Talking
tennis.
to your neighbors. Oh man, that is not socialized properly. He should be afraid of his neighbors like all the public schools kids are.
Right. Going up and asking some retired coach to give him lessons 3 times a week, every single week.
Oh man.
He schedules it. He plans it. I don't have a clue. I just am here for the ride on it. I'm fine, whatever you want. But yeah, this is something that shocks me is kids don't think they can do anything. And I did a post a while ago saying, if you want to go knock the door down of a CEO at a company to go get a job, go do it. There is no boundary. Now, physically, people jumped on my throat and said, don't knock, how rude, don't go knock the door down of somebody. I'm sitting here thinking, obviously, we're not going to break the door. But the idea is, if I want to go contact somebody for something, I can figure out how to do that, or I will try my darndest. And I might not get it the first time. That doesn't matter to me. I've never been told I can't do something. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. It's not in my DNA. So I think that's a huge difference.
Absolutely, and we have a invisible epidemic in the United States. We have many visible epidemics, but one of the invisible epidemics is learned helplessness. The belief that we don't have any agency ourselves, that we are incapable of going out and learning new information. Right? I teach attachment theory, and I work with people on fixing their relationships. And one of the biggest problems I see is men and women who don't believe it's possible to learn a new communication approach, or that there is even another way to relate to each other. So they simply keep banging their heads against the same brick wall over and over until they get divorced. And I say, why didn't you, they come to me after the divorce, why didn't you stop and learn a different communication approach? What do you mean? There's different approaches? How would I even learn something like that? I don't know. That sounds too hard to even figure that out. I didn't even know I could. That's the approach. What you just said, and I found the same with my kids, is they are so used to learning new things and being aware that they can learn something new. They can ask me, Dad, teach me this thing. Hey, Dad, how can I learn about this? Where can I find more information about this? Dad, give me your phone. I want to ask ChatGPT about this thing and learn, like, do butterflies poop? Can I go look that up, Dad? I want to learn that, right? And like stupid little stuff, but I reward it and say, absolutely, let's ask ChatGPT. Let's do a Google search. Let's look it up on YouTube. Let's the biggest free university in the world. Let's find information so that you can figure that out. So when they ask me something, hey, let's go figure that out together. Do butterflies poop? Well, it turns out they do. I learned that too. My daughter taught me that one, by the way, not my son.
That's a good one. Yeah. No, I mean, same thing. My son's always asking me. The other day he came in and said, hey, Mom, what's the 9th planet? I'm like, Pluto? They still calling that planet? I don't know. He's like, no. You don't know about it? No, sorry. I thought it was Pluto. I know they got rid of that one. He's like, no. The 9th planet is the hypothetical planet number 9. Who knew? I never even knew. So, I mean, yeah, that is something. I think the big thing we don't do enough, or children don't do enough, or people in general don't do, is ask questions. And I mean that so deeply. We don't ask questions on any level. And I think that's part of a system that children are ingrained from the beginning. Don't ask to go to the bathroom. Don't ask why. Asking why, I mean, Carl Sagan said, the biggest, most important question we have in the world is why? Why is the sky blue? Why is the grass green? If we're not asking why, I mean, what are we? We're just existing. We're existing in some sort of, pre-designed fed world where we just follow along the routine like everybody else. And then we have all these people saying, well, what's my purpose? Why am I here? And they kind of just gone through life in these like cattle rows or something.
The U.S. public school system in particular doesn't just beat it out of children to never ask why. It also says, sit silently at your desk for 8 hours. Nobody has time to listen to you. No one wants to hear from you. Be totally and utterly silent, or you will be punished and medicated like these other kids around you. Then the kid goes home to see their parents that they only get to see maybe 3 hours a day at the end of the day when everybody's exhausted. Do you think they're going to talk and share with their parents? Parents, even if you say, hey, how was your day? It was fine. It was cool. Fine. No problem. Right? Meanwhile, like you just said, your kid is coming in. Mom, let me tell you about this planet. My son, not that long ago, I was trying to use the bathroom and the door was locked. And I hear knock, knock, knock. Dad, I need to tell you something. Okay, buddy, what is it? I just found out that there are 3 different types of skunks. Let me tell you about them. And he's yelling to me about the different classifications of skunks. And I'm like, okay, here we go. And that's a regular thing for us is he loves to learn. Then he loves to share that information. It sounds like your kids are the same.
Same. But you know what the crazy thing about that is? When I see a difference in myself as an adult, I still do that. I will still go, and it's weird, trust me, because you don't realize. Here's the weird part of homeschooling, which to me isn't weird at all. It's actually kind of cool. You don't realize that people don't ask questions as adults either. And I remember I was with some homeschooling friends at a field trip, and I remember we were at a farm, and we drove by a barn, and the person's telling us, okay, that's a pole barn. So I said to the kids jokingly, I'm like, why do you think they call it a pole barn? And they all looked at me like, huh? I'm like, it's the poles. They're built with poles. But I'm the one who's always asking these questions, silly questions. And I don't think that it's silly myself, but I just generally want to know why anything is happening. We went to see a Ramhorn snail, the great Ramhorn snail being reintroduced into the wild. I don't even know what this is. But I'm sitting here vested in a snail this big because it's apparently one of the like greatest I don't know, revival snails back into the wild of all time. And now I know this. And I'm so proud of myself to know all about the magnificent Ramhorn snail. Shout out to, NC State for teaching me about that. But I mean, I'm sitting here and people always have told me my whole life, you would be phenomenal at trivia night. You have more random knowledge across so many topics. They tell me that it seems like I've lived 5 lifetimes. They'll joke and be like, how old are you, 100? And it's not that. It's that I genuinely am interested. Not only am I interested in topics, but people. When people say homeschool kids are, weird or not social, that just astounds me because, yeah, there may be people who aren't very social and like to be more of a quiet sort of personality. My sister's one of them. But there's not a day that we aren't interested in other people, in other things. We're very curious about the world. And I find that innate curiosity about life isn't in the children in today's society right now. And I think it's crushing. It's completely soul crushing because children have such beautiful imaginations that to see an entire generation stuck on phones, looking at their iPhone, not looking up, not playing in the street. My son was out the other day with a couple of boys, homeschool friends of ours, down by the water, and they're literally just tumbling around wrestling. And I was like, yeah, that's Thursday afternoon PE. And they're building castles and they're crushing each other's castles. And you just see kids lacking a life sort of force inside of them, which to me is just sad.
I I will second that and third that because when I grew up in the California public school system, I'll never forget some of the report cards I got from my teachers. I lagged behind all the other kids when it came to mathematics. They said that I was very deficient in mathematics. I was so anxious as a kid. I was almost nonverbal, and they said this kid will never be able to communicate effectively. I run a social media channel of 550,000, almost 600,000 people, a podcast of all things, and I'm a communicator for a living. I do public speaking. I do all kinds of stuff now, and I never forget that one of my school teachers in grade school, I think I was third or fourth grade, they said Adam only does the bare minimum in school to match the assignments. And I remember thinking at the time, like, what do you expect me to do? What do you think I'm going to do? And they said, unlikely to achieve in life if he does not step up and do more than the bare minimum for assignments. And I will never forget that. And here I am. I make, well, more than that school teacher does, but
Did you read that? Did they give you that?
I did.
Did they actually show you
I
that?
did. I remember because
Were
my
your
parents
parents like,
showed it to.
look?
Oh, I remember because my parents showed it to me and said, "We are very concerned because this is what your teacher has said. Look at this." And I was thinking, that's what my teacher thinks of me. I remember at the time thinking that, how much of a hit to the head that was from a teacher saying that to me. But no, look at me now. Look at me now, baby.
No,
That's it.
but that's a crazy thing to think about too, because I've never had that experience. You have to remember, like, no one's ever told me you didn't read fast enough. I've never had that. So for me to even think, you're telling me you did the bare minimum, and I'm sitting here being like, I would too. Sounds boring. I
Yeah.
don't want to sit in class for 8 hours. I'd do the bare minimum. Sounds smart.
Who wants to
I think
spend
there's
time
another.
wasting your time doing assignments that you hate from something that is pointless? Here's what I'd love to talk about is I saw one of your reels on Instagram. I wanted to come back to it. Here's the pin. There we go. See, there it is. There was an Instagram reel you had that said to build another synapse in your brain, to really make that connection and be able to understand it, you have to have 400 repetitions. 400 repetitions. And you have to hope that it sticks and hope that you have built that context. But it's very different when you do one crucial thing. Do you remember that? Can you share that with the audience?
Play. If you tie it to play, you will absolutely decrease that statistic by magnitudes. And if you think about it, it's crazy, because if you think about it, when you saw children in school years ago, a lot of it was done outside. There was a lot of song singing, right? There's a lot of like ring around the rosy type of things, but outdoors. So it was smart because they were trying to tie concepts to movement, play, sound. They were using more senses than just the repetitive topics that we see now. So I think, I mean, that was an interesting study that was done. And actually, the woman who did it, I think she passed away before she could complete all her work on the topic. But it was fascinating because it has been repeated many times. And again, no one looks at it though. No one pays attention, except for some other countries have noticed. I know the Netherlands pays more attention to these things, and they have some amazing stats on their education, which also shocks me, is how our statistics for our reading, literacy, writing, math, just graduation statistics plummet, yet we keep doing the same thing, which makes me think there's a reason why we're doing the same thing and not trying to get any better
Yeah,
here.
we just
But
lower the standards so it doesn't look as bad. That's what we
right,
do in the U.S.
and pass kids through. But yeah, there are so many stats out there that validate alternative methods of education. And I mean, one thing that I always think is designed, it's the education system is designed for our economy, essentially. It's designed so that two people have to work and put their children in the education system. I think it's designed as a place to care for kids outside of our homes.
There's the
It
9 hours a day
also,
right there. Why does it take nine
yeah,
hours a day to learn 1.5
exactly.
hours of information? Because it's daycare.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And but it's more than daycare. I think all this sort of, I mean, this is a personal opinion of mine
Please
and
go.
probably not everybody's favorite take. And this is coming from a single mom, and I'm not somebody who champions being a single mom at all, but I really think the stats of divorce and the sort of the dissolution of the family unit in my mind has contributed to where we are in the education system. Because yeah, one parent can't homeschool, so that's why you need the education system. The more single parents we have, the harder it is to homeschool. The more we diversify the family unit and families in general, and the more we break them apart, the more the government controls the entire education of our children. And I'm not trying to say anything terribly political about it, but I don't see it getting fixed. I believe it does start, people say it starts at home, but I think it starts from family. I think it just starts from, but as you mentioned, schools aren't teaching relationships, aren't teaching how to have good attachments, right? This is not a system that's taught. So it's a cyclic event that keeps going on. You get children who don't know how to have good relationships. They have bad experiences in the school system, negative experiences, as we mentioned. They don't know how to form attachments properly. Then they go out into the world and they just propagate the cycle all over again. We have a home unit that needs two incomes, the two-income household, which means they have to be in the education system, and there we go. We have now sort of diversified families, not diversified, we have
In the
taken
bad way.
apart
In the bad
families.
way.
Yeah, in a bad way. Yeah. So that's, I mean, to me, homeschooling is a great option, but I understand why people say they can't do it. But I also see that that's the point. They don't want you to be able to do it.
What would you say is the most frustrating conversation you have with somebody when they are becoming a parent and they're thinking about homeschooling, or they're just even thinking about schooling, and you ask them, are you going to homeschool? What's the most frustrating conversation that gets stuck?
Oh, that's tricky. There are a couple, but primarily, I don't see parents truly valuing their children. And I know that's kind of a hard thing to say and it's a broad brush, but I often see parents looking at their lifestyles more so than they look at their child's education and upbringing. So when I say that, now I've lived a couple places. I've lived in LA and I've lived in Dallas. And depending on where you are, what environment you're in, society will dictate how you should raise your kid. And if you're not strong enough to decide whether or not you want to implement those values and morals into your child's upbringing, then you're going to go along and do what the society is telling you there. And this happens on all levels. And I've seen it across the board because sending your child to a Catholic school that costs, $40,000, $45,000 a year is what everybody does who wants to have their children well educated and go to the next college step. But I've also seen what happens behind the curtain there. And I often see that while you do get 8 hours to do your job or focus on your life or, go to the gym and whatever else you want to do at home, that education that you're paying so much for and you feel so confident in that they're getting taken care of the right way isn't necessarily doing it. And a lot of times parents look the other way because they don't want to acknowledge what's really going on. And I pick on the Catholic school or the Christian school system a lot because I see it. And I see what happens in the education system. I see what parents don't want to acknowledge for a multitude of reasons. What you talked about in the beginning of the podcast, I see SA happen, and I see it happen on all levels. And this is in the private schools, which everyone says, oh, but I send my kid to private school, but I send my kid to this school. Well, a lot of times those hold a false sense of security. What I see all the time. And I think it happens almost more so in those schools than it does in a public school system where there's a parent who's highly involved.
Well, I can vouch for that because, and we'll be sensitive to the censors here and the topics. I can see my producer cringing off camera.
I'm trying.
But no, it's tough because you can't even talk about this stuff. I do remember growing up, the most challenged high school was the religious high school. And not because religious kids are bad, but because, well, you send your kids to school and they socialize with peers. Well, guess what kind of peers get put into religious schools? Yes, religious families. And then guess what? The troubled kids who drop out from other schools who are so troubled they can't function in other systems, so they get put into these programs to correct them. And it turns out they don't get corrected. It turns out that they actually go in and socialize very negatively with their other peers and spread terrible, terrible behavioral patterns and traumas through those programs. So you think you're sending your kids to the best programs. Well, turns out you're not. Turns out you're sending your kids actually into an even worse meat grinder than if you were simply putting them into the public school system, which again, 1 in 10 stat for inappropriate contact with an adult in that system. So it's even higher in the private ones. So I fully agree with you. I hope that the people at home are listening very, very, very carefully to this. What are some of the best parts about homeschooling? Because we've talked a lot of people might say a lot of fear mongering, a lot of stress, a lot of bad, and it's all just true. But what would you say are the best parts of homeschooling, right? What should people be looking forward to? I want to homeschool my kids. I want to do this. I want to do this. What are the best parts that they can get excited about?
Sure. Well, the best part for me, hands down, is the experience of, I always say, adventure. I'm a big adventure schooling. Yes, I have a curriculum. Yes, we stick to it sometimes. But what I love is to go and experience the world. I like to be in it to learn.
Mhm.
And that's my personality driving it. My son would be fine if we sat here and did school for some amount of time, but it's what I love. So you have this freedom. And yes, you can learn for only 2 hours a day and do your education and then get outside. I mean, one of the best things for me in life is to be outdoors in nature. And we don't necessarily learn Monday through Friday, we're learning all the time. So I think the freedom it gives you to go learn, go experience. I've got like 6 hobbies I'm going to have when I'm old just because of the things my son and I have learned to do along the way. I'm over here going to start learning how to glass blow because we were learning chemistry through glass blowing when he was 6. But I mean, I think that you get to discover for as an adult, and yes, it's a great for the child to learn, but as an adult, you get to learn your passions all over again. You get to have a better relationship with your child, a more involved relationship. I know my son. I know him forward and backward. I know what that kid's going to say before he says it. And I hope that as I get older, we'll have that same relationship. He'll be a teenager and he'll do his own thing, but I'm going to know him so well that I'll know if I can trust him. And that's one thing my parents, I feel, have always done for us. They've always trusted our decisions, good, bad, and different. We have done them all, but they've trusted us because they've known us. And the other thing is, your relationship with your kid is so important. Your children are your legacy. And not having that close relationship, I think, is a really tragic thing. Nobody's ever been at the end of their life and said, man, I really wish I hadn't spent as much time with my kid. It's the opposite. So I really think you're going to spend some really quality years that you only get once with your child. So, I mean, those are some of my greatest influences. It's what I talk about a lot. You know, you get out, you spend some hours on some academics, and the rest of the time you're experiencing life, you're learning hands on. And what's better than that? I mean, I now know how to do things I never knew how to do just because I'm re-educating myself all over again.
It's amazing how many things you can include in homeschooling as well. I recently got to take my 8-year-old son on his first plane trip. And I taught him about travel. I taught him about economics, paying money for different things. I got to teach him about cities and how systems function. I got to teach him about Uber drivers. And I got to teach him about all kinds of different things, very practical skills that also tie back exactly into his schooling curriculum. So he got to learn it in a whole new way with wildly different context. His brain for mathematics is incredible. And what's funny is I can sit him and teach him because my brain works the same as his does. Now that I know math, I'm almost 40, finally I've learned math, I can start teaching him the way I know math, the way that I was able to learn later, delayed after my other people. And now he is wildly ahead of the other kids in math. It turns out I wasn't bad at math. It turns out that my brain needed a different system, and he is years ahead of his peers with the same brain that I had. It's phenomenal seeing that just like you said, your Instagram channel said 400 repetitions with zero context, sitting in a classroom, repeat, 4 hours of homework. Or the really cool stat you had on there was it's 10 or 20 repetitions in play, which you can knock out that fast, by the way, in a play setting. You do 10 or 20 repetitions. Imagine your kid learning 20 to 40 times faster than their peers because they're doing it with context. Context is everything, and you can be right there sharing that context with them. You know, Claire, I'm the attachment specialist. I teach secure attachment for families. I am teaching families to bring secure attachment back because over the last 100 years, we have lost it. The stat now is 2/3 of Gen Z, young adults and kids, are now without secure attachment. 2/3 of them are insecurely attached. It's going very much the wrong direction. I'm trying to turn that. And one of the biggest pieces, frankly, is spending more time with your child and not spending time with them staring at a tablet or having them in the corner staring at a tablet while you stare at this screen over here. It is walking through life and experiencing that joy, like you taking your kids to see a snail reintroduced to society and into the world, and that's beautiful. I love that because that's something my kids would want to do. Like, Dad, the snail. I can hear them now, right? Asking what is a pole barn and why is it have why do we call it that? My son with the skunks, like all of these are wonderful experiences that I get to have with my kids and they get to have with me. We are building secure attachment. We are cultivating stronger emotional resilience for them for life. We are making sure their brain is properly cultivated and grown in the right ways. I am making sure they are years ahead of their peers. I'm making sure they don't get those report cards I got when I was a kid that your son will be stupid and useless for life because he doesn't have math at this level because we didn't teach it to him right. And by the way, I'm making sure that they are going to be happy, fulfilled adults and not corporate drones who hate their life, who check out early, right, and are coping with dopamine binges and all the other escapism, right? The research shows that the average American, this is pre-COVID numbers, the average American spends 5 years of their life engaged purely in escapist entertainment. 5 years. So if your average life expectancy is 75, then 5 of those 75 years is raw escapist entertainment. That was pre-COVID. Those numbers have grown drastically from what the research shows. It may have actually doubled. So imagine spending 10 years of your life purely just focused into escapist entertainment and losing everything else.
And to me, that's not a life. Everybody claims they want the 90s childhood back. They claim that. But we can have it at any point. We can have that childhood. Just take away the screens, go outside, splash in some puddles, find some worms. I mean, it's not expensive to have a 90s childhood, honestly.
It's cheap.
It really isn't.
It's cheap.
It just requires us to not immediately grab for the easy thing. Your child gets hurt, he cries, she cries. Don't give him an iPad to soothe him. Talk to them. And I see things like that all the time. Oh, you've had a really bad day at school? Sure, you can go watch TV. You can go watch your phone. But they don't need that. What they need is to understand how to cope. And I truly think that is why children, you talk about attachment, I truly think our obsession with using electronics and technology to moderate our moods and our emotions is hugely hurting our children, their development, relationships. I mean, the relationship stats are horrific now. And I think they're not going to get better unless people like you bring up these topics so strongly that people need to look. I mean, the world, it's not a fun place to be on your own, hurting and, dysregulated. It's not fun. I think I've always had a very happy, outgoing demeanor, and I attribute that to my parents, the way I was raised. I call my mom 3 times a day, maybe 4, depending on how annoying I want to be. I talk to my dad all the time, and I always say it's because of the way they raised me. Did I hate them when I was 21 and wanted to do what I wanted to do? Sure. Do I take care of my ailing father who's terminally ill now? Yeah, you bet I do. And we miss all of that now. How would you feel as a child who didn't see their parents because they were sitting on the couch because they worked so hard and you were on the phone in the other room? We are so close, but so separated. And I think that is just where everyone needs to just take a second and see what it is and make a change. I mean, I know it sounds simple, but really we can change anything we want to change within ourselves and within our life. We truly can.
For the parents who are out there listening right now, because they are, and they're listening to you and they're saying, "Oh, I wish that was true. I wish that I could change everything about my kids. I'm working this job that I hate. I'm up to my eyeballs in debt. I'm so tired. I'm run down. You don't get how hard it is. It would take so much for me to make a change in my life. I can't quit my job and spend every minute with my kids." Right? To them listening right now, what is one simple step that you might give them to get closer to their kids, closer to this ideal? Anything at all? What's the first step they could take right now?
Go for a walk. Go for a walk. Put the phones away. Go for a walk. You would be shocked how many questions come up, how many things your children will just talk to you about when you go for a walk. My son is a motor mouth. I don't hear the end of it when I go for a walk. Sometimes I want to not go for a walk. But truthfully, And when I have had an experience like that with a child who's hurting over something, I've simply said, okay, let's go. Let's just go for a walk. Let's walk down to that stream. And I didn't realize the power of that. It was more me not knowing what to do. But I thought, hey, if we're moving, we're not looking at each other, we'll be side by side, we'll be going to a destination. You can tell me anything and I won't judge. And I think it really breaks down barriers when you're experiencing the outdoors, rain or shine. You'd be surprised. Rain, same thing. And you have a purpose and you're together doing a purpose. Now, I'll tell you a really funny story. It's not, well, a touching story. My mom is a saint, okay? And she knows how to relate to people. She can relate to anybody, anywhere, anytime. And the reason I bring this up is because after she educated us and we were kind of older, she did a little bit of tutoring for children from the inner city in Albany, New York. And she was given this one child that she was warned about. He's the worst of the worst. He's failing. He's nonverbal. She was given him to teach him like math or something. And she didn't know what to do. So she shows up at his house, worst part of town in Albany, New York. If you know Albany, you know there's some scarier areas there. And she shows up and he's sitting on the steps. And my mom tells this story beautifully because she says, well, I didn't know what to do. So I just sat there, didn't speak. And he looked over to her and said, aren't you supposed to teach me something? She says, do you want me to? Shrugged, nothing. They sat there. She saw what she thought was an animal run across the street. And my mom, being who she is, she says, what's that? And he looks and says, I don't know. Says, I'm going to go find out. So here's this crazy little lady in Albany, New York, in a neighborhood she doesn't know, walking down the street to find some animal. So the child follows her. What are you doing? He says. And she says, I'm going to see what that animal is. Okay, he starts following her. And he follows her through the neighborhoods all over. They never find an animal, but they go back, they walk back to sit on the stoop. And from that day forward, they were friends. My mom was his tutor, and she helped him graduate. Now, what happened? They had a bonding moment. And the bonding moment was simply existing for a purpose that they didn't even think about. They just needed that moment to sort of transfer energy with no expectations, but to be together. And I think it's a sort of a silly story, but I always think about that. And I think that's what parents can do right now is just be with your child. Go be with them. Doesn't matter how old they are or how silly it is. This kid was a teenager. Doesn't matter. Just go for a walk. Say, hey, we're going to go look for fireflies. And that's truly what I think works.
I love this. I've worked with so many families. They bring in, their teenager. Back when I worked at the clinics, they'd bring in a teenager, 13 years old, 14 years old. Oh, she's yelling at me. He's yelling at me. He won't spend time with me. And I'd say, okay, here's what we're going to do. Okay. 10 minutes a day. Do you have 10 minutes a day? And the parents, oh, I don't know. I'm so busy all the time. Okay, look, 10 minutes. Okay. You're going to sit with your kid. Screens away. You're going to have an activity. You're going to do a puzzle, or you're going to play Go Fish. You're going to color, whatever you're going to do. 10 minutes of an activity where you're not looking at each other. And the only rule is that you have to keep asking your child questions. You ask them questions. You do not make any statements. If you make a statement, you lose the game. Okay? You must keep asking them questions. You can't lecture them. You have to ask them stuff about them and just keep asking. You ask, what's your favorite? Who's your favorite Power Ranger? Or what did you learn today? Or what are you struggling with? You just keep asking, keep asking, keep asking. You ask branching questions. Ask questions about their answers. 10 minutes. You can do this. You can set a literal timer, and you're going to tell your child that this is your question time, where you're going to be spending just undiluted time and attention on them, purely focused. And I'd make them go do this for 2 weeks and come back and report. And it was phenomenal how it would take. Little kids would just eat this up the first day. They were all over this. It was unbelievable. 10 minutes of focused time, no screens. It would transform their relationship. But the angry teenagers, I hate you, I don't like you, I'm not going to speak to you, I want to go to my room. It was about 2.5 weeks of consistent every day, showing them that this wasn't a phase. You weren't going to give up on them. You actually wanted to get to know them, telling them how it was, and then continuing to do it for 10 minutes. It was amazing. The fighting would stop, the yelling would stop, the anger would stop, the isolation would stop, the alienation would stop. Suddenly they didn't want to spend every minute in their room. They wanted to be out in the living room. Suddenly they wanted more than 10 minutes. It was like a half hour. Suddenly it was, okay, we don't even have to set the clock. In fact, why don't we go for a drive? In fact, why don't we go to lunch together? And then have a whole lunch together. Let me find out more about you. And come to find out, those parents didn't know anything about their teenager. They were asking them questions and learning about them and understanding new things about how their child had grown into a young adult. And it formed this phenomenal secure attachment where they started being able to come to their parent all of a sudden after 2 or 3 months. Okay, can I ask you questions? Now, here's some problems I'm facing. Can you help me understand what to do? What about this? Can you help me with this problem I'm having? And all of a sudden, they turn into a real family instead of just people who happen to live in the same house. It's just 10 minutes a day. That's all that's even required. If you can give 10 minutes a day, all of a sudden, life starts getting better.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. We do that. We play board games here. Huge board game family. And whenever neighborhood kids wanted to come over, I'd tell them I got to teach one because I don't like sitting still. So if it's a board game, I'm good. I have a puzzle, I'm good like that. So I tell them, hey, I've got a great new board game. They love it. Teenagers would eat it up. Board games, anything you've got. It just, I think also you got to remember your childhood a little bit. Like you can have fun and enjoy. And I mean, we used to love slapjack and it doesn't matter the game. I mean, we used to love it. We really did as kids. So we can remember those things are fun. We don't just need video games.
If you look at a lot of pre-industrialized societies and you look at the records of them, or you talk to people that were in them prior to their heavy industrialization, you actually see the adults actually engaging in pretty regular play. Play was actually more regular for adults in pre-industrial societies because they spent more time with their kids. They weren't locked away in factories. They weren't raised in schools and then locked away in factories and become corporate drone kind of things. They got used to play, and it's so hilarious. Once you get, I can bring any of my adult male friends who are unmarried and have no kids, and I bring them to my farm where I got my 5 kids, and my kids just hit them like a tidal wave and knocked them to the ground. But it's funny, within a day or two, my buddies are playing with the kids, they're talking with them, they're laying on the floor, the kids are piling on them. Hey, can you read me this book? Then he reads them the book. The kids want to wrestle, and all of a sudden, it's happened again and again. My buddies they're walking around with a smile on their face, and then they go home and they have a crash and they say, Adam, it was so amazing there. How do I bring this to my life? Well, buddy, what do you think you were doing different here? Well, I was playing with all your kids. Yeah. You were immersed in a family that was connected, but you were also playing. Those are 2 key elements that most adults today, I think that's why we're so wretchedly unhappy, is we don't have enough kids around us and we're not playing. Both of those things.
I truly believe that too, what you said. We don't have enough kids around us. I think of that sometimes when I see people who haven't had children. And now I'm not saying it's for everyone, but I think having children is one of the biggest blessings you can have in your life. It truly is. So when I see that, I always wonder, like just think about it. Not that everyone needs to. I'm not saying you have to. I just think having children's great. It really is. You might not even know how great it is until you have a child. I was never the person who wanted to have children, get married, etc. I was the corporate, run a business, type A, I'm going to go climb the corporate ladder. I can tell you, I am so happy I have my son. And you will not know that happiness until you have a child. And I think society just moves us away from the idea that family and children are an honorable, wonderful thing to reach for.
100%. And I will say my wife, her experience was the same. She was a valedictorian out of her high school, was offered full ride scholarship to Harvard for business. She ran and her own company for a while, helped put me through schooling and all everything. So, and then the moment I was done with schooling, got out in the field, started working, she said, okay, I'm done. I'm done. I want to go have babies. And I said, okay, you put in your work. I am thankful. I will step forward. I started providing, and we've popped out one after another. Every 2 years, we're up to 5. So,
But have you see what society does? Do you know Ballerina Farm?
no, tell me.
Okay. Ballerina Farm is a woman who was a ballerina. She was accepted to Juilliard. She was in New York City. And being accepted into Juilliard as a ballerina is, unimaginable. It's an amazing honor. And anybody would be thrilled to go. She chose to get married and live a stay-at-home mom lifestyle. I don't know how many children she has. She's got, gosh knows how many. But she lives on a farm. She has cows. Her husband works. And recently, I think it was the Times, you'll have to look this up. The Times did an article about her where the reporter, a single woman, dragged her through the mud. And I'm not kidding about this. I was astonished. This woman did all the interview side by side with her husband, right? She did it alongside him. And the reporter said, "You never get a minute to talk to her. Her husband's domineering." I looked at this whole interview and thought, wow, what an awesome family unit. She wants to be there with her husband because he's a part of her life. They said, oh, her husband married her and made her quit Juilliard. I mean, the whole article skewed her lifestyle to fit this narrative that women should women should absolutely have their career only. They don't need to change for a family. It's sort of this narrative that if you want to be a stay-at-home mom, that's not really an honorable career anymore. You got to go and, go be the ballerina, even if it's not what you want. We think as a society, that's what you should do. So I looked at that whole article and just was astonished that this woman having this beautiful life, at home, making butter, cooking, doing all this stuff, she was dragged through the mud for that for months on end. Actually, the article had to write a retraction because she went and said, please, this is not, you took everything out of context. You smeared our name. They actually tried to write a retraction. It still wasn't a good one. But again, it was just shocking that that's apparently not an acceptable thing to do anymore.
I wonder how many women in America are in a toxic relationship with their corporate employer. I bet it's quite a few. Because I don't think corporate employers really love you and care for you and will work diligently side by side with you to take care of you as you get older. They tend to toss you the wayside as fast as they humanly can to replace you with somebody else.
Yeah. If someone's cheaper. Yeah.
Someone's cheaper.
Can I get the work for less than you? We don't need you. We're not actually loyal.
Correct.
I mean, it's business. So it's just shocking.
People forget that you are going to serve somebody somewhere. So why not an unloving corporate overlord? That sounds like a pretty good option.
Yeah, I think not. That's not what I think is the option, but it is apparently society likes to say it is right now.
And the same thing, throwing our kids out to unloving government overlords to educate them in centers designed to put them into factories or prisons. Probably not the best bet either. I'm going to let the people at home decide that. Please let me know in the comments if you think that that's the best option for your children. I would love to hear that, please. I'm happy to have those conversations. I'm not fragile. I can take it. Claire, this has been a phenomenal conversation. Thank you so much for being here. I am glad we have advocates for you like they're out in the field. We need more people who are stepping forward, talking about how normal it actually is to educate your own children instead of turning them over to strangers who are in paid daycare structures. For everybody at home who needs to go check out your material, please share with us where they can find you, what you're working on. I know that you've got an exciting book that you've been thinking about. You were talking to me earlier before we filmed about. Please share all this information with everybody at home.
Sure. Well, you can find me at live.leaf.learn on Instagram and Facebook. I am on TikTok, but I'm not very good at that whole TikTok generation thing. But I'm working on it. And then I'm actually working on a book about what homeschooling was like as a homeschooling kid. It seems like people like to know what it really was like. I'm working on a book with my brother, who the two of us are almost a year apart, a little more than a year apart. So we had a phenomenal experience, and we're really trying to expose what that was like. I mean, there's pieces in it like our agricultural lesson was haying with the neighbor and then riding the hay wagon back to the farm while trying to duck underneath the power lines. So, we had an interesting life growing up that involved a lot of, I think Jordan Peterson says that dangerous play is good within reason. We had a lot of that going on, but also it was a lot of fulfilling experiences with a pretty solid family. So we're looking at coming out with that in the over the Christmas holiday. So we'll see how that goes. I'm kind of excited. It should be interesting.
Absolutely fantastic. And everybody at home, I very, very, very much recommend that you go check out her Instagram. I love the reels that you post over there, the stats, the facts, the information. It's very inspirational, and it makes it bite-sized for anybody who feels like it would be too overwhelming to step into this task of educating your children at home, because you are told that it's way too much. You have to have a professional come do it. And you're going to pick probably the most unhappy professionals in the world, by the way, through most of the public schooling system, unfortunately. So,
and And I run all my Instagram and respond. So I try to respond to just about anyone who has a question. I'm not here to, I don't charge anything for it. If you got a question about homeschooling, what it's like, how to do it, if I don't have the answers, I'll find people who do. I'll connect you. Just feel free to ask. I'm pretty easy going with that.
Love it. Everybody, go check out Claire. Claire, thank you so much for being here today. It meant a
Thank
lot, and
you.
this was a great conversation.